The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're so pleased to have Senator Amanda Chase with us today. Good to see you.
Hey, it's great to be back.
You know, you're in the home stretch in terms of this 2017 short session. How are things going in the Senate and in your district?
Well, I feel very optimistic. I mean, even though we had such a large shortfall this year with the budget, I feel really good about giving our state police a raise, which it's been much needed. There's a lot of wage compression issues. We were able to give entry-level state police officers a $7,000 raise for entry-level state police law enforcement folks who were actually going elsewhere, going to the counties and the localities. And we were having to constantly train and retrain new police officers with the state police. So I'm glad to see that through our budget we have prioritized our law enforcement and that we have given them the support and the financial resources that they've needed for a long time. And I'll tell you something else. You know, this is the first year that I'm voting for the budget.
The first year. Congratulations.
The first year. So I'm excited, and I'll tell you why I voted for it. I think it's so important that we prioritized our teachers this year, and that was one of my contingencies about voting for the budget. Pay our teachers, and though it's a 2% rate increase, I'd love for it to be more, but given the deficit that we talked about in the beginning, you know, initially I think in the governor's budget he was talking about just giving them a bonus, but this is actually an ongoing, would actually help them on an ongoing basis. So the state's portion of 2% is what our teachers are going to be receiving, so I'm really happy about that.
Great. Now I understand part of that funding is done through some lottery funds, which gives local school districts much more flexibility.
Right, absolutely. You know, and when we take a look at the core functions of government, I think that we need to prioritize those issues first and then see what monies we have left before we start funding some of these other things, like other things that we were talking about earlier, like Go Virginia and some of these other projects. You know, we have to take a look at our core functions of government, figure out how much we have in revenues and allocate it there first before we do anything else. I mean, I don't know about you, but in my family where we have 4 kids, we take a look at how much income we have, how much revenue we have coming in, and we have to adjust our budget. But we always look at the core functions. It's important that we have a place to sleep and eat, and it's just like our government. We have to do the same things, and we have to, and that's why I support the zero-based budgeting that Senator Sturdivant and I co-patron together, and looking at every agency in our government and make sure that we start with a zero base and justify our expenses before we spend them.
And obviously education and public safety are core functions of government. Talk to us a little bit more about those state police. I understand that there are a lot of vacancies, for example, in the state police academy. People just aren't applying because of the low rate of pay there. Give us an order of magnitude. What does an entry-level state police officer start at now?
Well, I believe it was like $36,000 a year, so we bumped them up to about $42,000. And if you think about it, you think about how they have to put their life on the line every day. And they're the first ones on the scene. They're our first responders anytime there's a crisis that goes on. And, you know, we've had reports where, you know, people have needed help and it's taken a little bit longer. You know, when you're faced with an emergency situation, you know, whether it's a car crash on the interstate, you don't want to have to wait 45 minutes, an hour to get help, especially in a situation that's a crisis like that. So we think that's very important to give those resources to our state police and certainly compensate them, at least begin to compensate them for really what is challenging and stressful work.
And you're doing the same thing for deputy sheriffs as well, and you're dealing with a compression issue, are you not?
That's exactly right, and it is somewhat similar to the state police. You know, whenever you have entry-level folks who are making almost what people who've been there 15
Right.
plus years, that causes issues with morale. And you know, our law enforcement, they are not ones to complain, and they are not going to complain. But we as legislators, it's our role to look out for them and make sure that they are available and properly trained and staffed and ready to take care of our constituents.
And I also understand that K through 12 is being held harmless, is it not?
That is, yes, that's my understanding. Yes, there are no cuts.
And the difference between what the governor wanted to do in terms of state employees and what the General Assembly is about to do is fairly significant, is it not? I mean, a one-time bonus is one time only.
Right.
It really doesn't help one's retirement in terms of the Virginia retirement system either, does it?
That's exactly right. And bonuses are also taxed differently as well. And so I think any time that we can give someone a permanent increase to their regular salary as opposed to a one-time bonus, I think that's probably preferable for most people.
Now, there were some fees, as I recall, that you were not real pleased with in
Yes.
terms of the budget. Talk to us about those.
Absolutely. So, you know, when I ran for office, I signed what's called, it's an Americans for Prosperity tax pledge, that I will pledge not to raise taxes. And I see, you know, fees to a degree is something that we also do not want to raise. They're in the budget. So Senator Sturton and myself went through and actually highlighted every fee increase we found, and we pulled it out of the budget, and we actually voted against it. And one of those that I also pulled out of the budget and voted against is Go Virginia. And I am very pro-business, very pro-business. I mean, my family has owned business and currently are small business owners. But the challenge that we have with Go Virginia, and I have so much respect for the stakeholders in this. I mean, they've done a lot of work on this, and I definitely appreciate what they're trying to do. And what they're trying to do is this. Sometimes there's a disconnect between the education that our kids are getting in high school and college and what the needs are in the workplace. So we do need to streamline this process to make sure that the education our kids are getting allows them to use those skills immediately in the workforce. So that is important, and I completely agree with that. I think my concern has been with the establishing of a council that would have unelected folks, people who are not elected by the people, you know, great, strong business leaders, but they are allocating grants and taxpayer funds. And I think that's where I have a little bit of reservation on. I just don't know that we should be putting unelected authorities over giving out this grant money and what's basically taxpayer money. That should be done by elected officials. And so, you know, that gives me a little bit of heartburn. And so, you know, instead I would look at, we need to be going to our Chamber of Commerce and talking to them as legislators. You know, there's no cost to that. You know, Go Virginia, I think, was at $14 million, which is why I voted against the budget last year. I said we need to be giving our teachers a raise instead of putting money into, you know, what could be potentially a good project, but it even now under the current budget it's $7 million. So a lot of it is prioritizing the money that we have. Like I said, I think we need to focus on the core functions of government first before we do all these other options, or even returning, you know, if we have money left over, we have some money set aside in our rainy day fund, then we need to look at, returning that money to the taxpayers, because ultimately they're the ones that are paying for these services.
Yes, they are. I guess another example of a critical need are rural school districts, especially in Southwest Virginia. I didn't realize how significant a problem declining enrollment in the classrooms were there, yet those school districts have to maintain those plants as well.
Well, that's exactly right. And, you know, just in general, you know, infrastructure costs something, schools cost something, teachers cost something, and so we figure out a per cost basis for each of those students, and the schools and the counties will get those funds based on the student allocation. So when you have students that are leaving a particular area and either going into the suburbs, then it does leave them in quite a lurch, if you will, with not as much funding to do, basically
Sure.
with the same infrastructure and the same fixed cost.
How's the economy in your district? How is unemployment? You have any new employers who have cited recently there?
Well, things are looking up. They are looking up, and honestly, I feel like there is a optimism among business-minded folks who see this new federal administration, and we've seen businesses to actually stay here in the U.S. as opposed to moving overseas, moving their operations elsewhere. We have to keep in mind that any time that the more regulation that we implement, the more taxes, the cost of doing business, the more we increase that, we're not just operating here in Virginia, we are competing with other states and we're competing globally. So we have to keep the cost of business down as much as we can because we are competing internationally. So, we're looking, a lot of the legislation that I personally, chief co-patron this year, focused on the economy. That was my number one issue because that's what was important to my constituents. If you don't have a job, nothing else really matters at this point.
Right.
So we want to make sure we have gainful employment. One of the bills I introduced would have lowered the corporate income tax. In Virginia, it's currently 6%. And my hope was that we could lower that to 2.5% to be competitive with North Carolina, which is currently at 3%. And that would bring more corporations headquartered here and ultimately more jobs because that's at the end of the day what it comes down to. Where are the jobs? Where are our constituents able to find meaningful employment?
Last year, you and Delegate Mark Levine
Yes.
started the Transparency Caucus. I know there have been a lot of successes there. Talk to us about how that initiative is going.
Well, it's going, going very well. We just met this past Monday, and it's very alive and well. And we continue to encourage and pitch to our Senate and members in the House, our colleagues there, to encourage them to be a part of the Transparency Caucus. Now, as we mentioned last year, the Senate is actually currently more transparent than the House. We have recorded votes in subcommittee, committee, and on the floor. And we are still videoing and putting on Facebook and our website video proceedings from the bills that we're chief patrons of and that we present so that our constituents can see how our bills fare or their bills fare, as we go before the committees.
And I think there's another organization that's been supplementing that effort this session.
Yes, that is my understanding as well, and I welcome it. And as far as the Transparency Caucus, one of the things that we're in the process of doing right now is drafting a letter to our clerks and expressing to them our desire to make sure that the new building that we move into is equipped with cameras and recording capabilities so that we can record our votes in subcommittee, in committee, and on the floor, and that is made transparent, even videoed.
And one of the major developments is the feature on the General Assembly website now that allows citizens to view on demand proceedings in both the Senate and the House floor.
That's right. And people are working. Hopefully if we're doing our job and keeping the cost of business doing low, people are employed, and so they work during the day when we're meeting during the General Assembly session. And there are issues that are important to folks out there, our constituents, and yet they're busy working. So anything that we can do to allow the citizens to engage with us, to be transparent so they can see what we're doing and include them in that process, to be accessible, to be approachable, and be transparent so that they can be a part of that process, I think only moves us in the right direction.
Now, what happens with the budget now in terms of process? There's a Senate version, there's a House version.
Correct.
There are some differences. So how does the process work to resolve those differences?
So what will happen over the next week and a half is we will go into conference, and different members of the House and the Senate, their combined committees, and we'll look over the budget, we'll look over different bills. We have, in some cases, you'll have a House bill and a Senate bill that are similar but not exactly the same. So you go into conference to work out those differences. and then come to some type of agreement and consensus, which will eventually, that will go back to the House and the Senate, will vote on it, and then it goes back to the governor, and hopefully, depending on which bill, if I like it or not, it gets signed into law or is vetoed.
So we're about a week from this Friday from adjournment. How much time will you have to review the final budget bill?
Well, I remember there was actually a law that was passed that gives us 48 hours to review the bill, and I wish I had a copy of the bill here, but it's about this thick.
That's pretty thick.
It's pretty thick, so you have to do a lot of teamwork and working through the budget to see what changes have been made to it, and but we work. I would have to say that, at least since I've been here, there is a sense of a culture of working together, which is very encouraging to me as a second year legislator. But I've been very pleased at the process thus far.
I think you signed on to a bill relating to coal ash ponds.
Yes.
What's that all about?
So this has become a very big issue in my district, and whenever electricity is great and we need it, and Dominion in our area is the provider of electricity, and they've done a great job of keeping our rates low compared to most every other state on the East Coast. So we want to have very inexpensive, cost-effective electricity, and that's very important. But a byproduct of electricity is something called coal ash. And we have multiple sites all over the state of Virginia. There's one just south of my district in Chesterfield. And I've actually toured the facility numerous times, and I just want to give compliments to Dominion for being so welcoming and working with us on this issue, because this is an issue they inherited. I mean, you're looking at over 50 years, at least I can speak specifically to the Chesterfield station. There's over 50 years of coal ash here, and it's something that Dominion actually inherited. And so in Chesterfield, we have the James River Basin, and then you have the coal ash ponds, which is basically sitting, and it's now dry, but it's sitting on what used to be the basin there for the James River. It used to flow in that route, and it's not lined, which concerns me. And so the question is, what do we do to ensure the safety of the park next door? There's a public park that's right next door to this power station, because you've got streams that people fish in, that they swim in, kayak in. The public is very engaged right there at that facility. And so one thing we've done is we've tried to partner with Dominion and the stakeholders like the James River Association and other environmental groups and constituents who are concerned about this issue. And we've brought people to the table. And my one question has been this. What is the cost? What are the options, first of all? And then what are the costs associated with those options? One of the options that we talked about that the federal government, the EPA, has said is that they've required all coal ash facilities to be closed, sealed and capped in place. I think it's by the year 2020. And so they're put under this pressure. Dominion is, we need to go cap and seal these in place. My concern has been, if you have this coal ash that's sitting in an unlined 100-year floodplain, do we need to excavate that? And so I've asked for the cost of that, and we're in the process of getting something that we can release to the public on that. But my question has been this. If we excavate the coal ash from that Chesterfield coal ash pond, and we transport it either by truck, which I personally don't think is a great option because you introduce other concerns and environmental risk, truckloads of coal ash that could fly out, and we're talking about years and years worth of this and hundreds of trucks a day. So I don't know that that's really a good alternative. But one of the questions I've asked is, what about trains? Because you've already got the rails right there at Chesterfield, and in Amelia, which is also in my district, they actually have a lined facility that is already receiving and accepting coal ash from North Carolina. So my question has been, what is the cost to excavate the coal ash from the unlined coal ash pond in Chesterfield and railing that in sealed containers so that the coal ash isn't flying out?
Right.
to the line facility in Amelia. And so we're working on that cost. We know it'll be in excess of $3 billion,
$3 billion.
which is a lot of money. And so my question has been, at what cost are people willing to excavate
Sure.
this? So the first thing we need to do is find out what specifically that cost is. We know that it's going to be billions of dollars, and so we're trying to get a percent increase. You know, we're trying to identify, because there's so many unknown costs. I mean, we don't even know how much coal ash specifically there is. So it's an ongoing discussion, and you know, we're working with the DEQ, we're working with Dominion, we're working with James River Association, all the stakeholders in this bill. As of this morning, it's already passed the Senate with bipartisan support, and it's gone through a House subcommittee, passed out unanimously with an amendment. Today it passed out of a full committee, the Agricultural Committee in the House, and so, you know, we're working together to hopefully pass this legislation, which would not mandate anybody to do anything, but basically give us the analysis that the DEQ, which is the governing authority, you know, for Dominion on this issue, to give them more tools and more information before they cap and seal this in place, which I feel like is the right thing to do. There was an amendment put on the bill that said that, well, Dominion can continue with the process of applying for a solid waste permit to cap and seal this in place when we don't have the evaluation just yet. They have a year to get the evaluation done. And so my concern is this: whatever we do, the State Corporation Commission is going to allow Dominion to recoup that cost.
Yes, from the
from the
ratepayers.
ratepayer.
Right.
So my concern is this: my background's finance, so I'm looking at this financially in addition to the well-being of our constituents. How many times do we want our ratepayers to pay for this? What if we cap and seal this in place, pass on that expense to our ratepayers, and then have to go back and realize, okay, actually we need to excavate this. So then we also incur the cost of unsealing, uncapping, and then possibly excavating and railing somewhere else, or maybe we find a vendor that, you know, there's some vendors that are actually or businesses that are buying coal ash from China. Why can't they buy it from Virginia? Well, we have all this coal ash, and I've seen it. It's mounds and mounds. It's football fields worth of coal ash. So we're just trying to bring as many options as we can to the table, bring everybody to the table, and discuss those options, not mandate anything, but let's have these discussions. Let's figure out what the cost is. And I also, in that amendment, I said we need public comment. We need to include the public in this discussion and hear their concerns. We cannot make this decision in a vacuum. People need to decide if the cost is enormous, which we don't know what that cost is, but we know it's great. Is the ratepayer willing to incur that cost to excavate the coal ash? So we're still in these discussions. The bill's still moving forward. It's still alive. And I look forward to working with Dominion, DEQ. I want to thank Senator Servell for his efforts. He has Possum Point that he's contending with in his area. And I'm thankful Chesterfield is not what Possum Point is, but I want to be ahead of the curve on that because I think our constituents, we owe that to them.
It's interesting because when you really think about it, this is as complicated as trying to change the tax code, for example.
Absolutely.
You just can't do one thing at one time because it's going to affect everything. Absolutely. There are a lot of stakeholders involved in it. There's no question about that. Well, good luck on that. Now, education issues I know you've been confronted with, but I want to go back to the economy for a minute.
Sure.
Because you've had dialogue in the Senate and the House has had similar dialogue about short-term rentals. The Airbnb phenomenon. How's that going?
Well, I can tell you where I am personally on it. I think, we need to encourage our entrepreneurs that have an idea and want to run with it and not overregulate them. We are so quick as the government to step in and overregulate things to the point where we don't allow the new idea to kind of take place and get root before we start going in and making changes to that. So I have voted against this, what I could call regulation and overreach of the localities on this project right now. You have some folks who are still struggling to make ends meet that might want to rent out a room in their house. I don't want the localities at this point coming in and telling people what they can and cannot do. And it's a delicate issue, and it differs from region to region. You know, if you live in Virginia Beach, you're going to have a whole different situation
Sure.
because you have, you know, a lot more hotels, and there could be some competition there. You know, same with the Williamsburg area. So every locality is different. Our district prefers not to have the regulation because we see as an opportunity that we don't want to take the wind out of the sails, so to speak. We want people to take advantage of this opportunity to maybe earn a little extra money on the side and try to encourage that, as opposed to go ahead and start putting in all this regulation. And I don't think now is the time for that.
Sure. I think you have another piece of legislation that you've co-sponsored with Senator Sturtevant, dealing with the publication of funds online by local school districts.
Absolutely. So, you know, as part of the Transparency Caucus, one of the things that I constantly push, whether it's proceedings for hearings, you know, videoing committees and that type of thing, is putting our checkbooks online. And you know, I've talked to my locality. Something we have to also be careful of is that we don't create unfunded mandates, which I have talked to the Chesterfield localities, and there would be a cost to the localities for trying to implement the type of IT system that would be necessary to actually put the checkbook online. So we'll have to work through those details, but the basis for the bill is good. Transparency, knowing where our taxpayer dollars that you and I are paying. You know, we talk about, let's just let the government pay for it. Well, who's the government? It's you and I. It's our taxpayer dollars. So we want to make sure that the states, the counties, that we're being good stewards of the money that people are giving us, and give them the opportunity to look at what we're doing.
30 seconds. Talk to us about your radio program.
Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase is a weekly program. It's a call-in show. It's from 4 to 5. It's on 8:20 a.m. And it is, I'm not paid to do it. It's just, you know, public service, and something that we're happy to do. I'm very appreciative to 8:20 a.m. for giving me the opportunity to provide that each week. You know, some folks are not able to travel down to the General Assembly, so it gives them the opportunity to talk to us by phone, and we welcome the opportunity.
Great. Thank you for being with us, Senator Amanda Chase. Good luck the rest of the session.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.